Hi, my name is Amanda Shores, and I'm happy to be here with you today virtually. Jamie has graciously asked if I could discuss a little bit about my career in GIS. And so I'll say I've never really considered myself to be in a GIS career, but I have used GIS tools throughout the work that I've been a part of over the past 10 years. So the majority of my work has really focused on the food, water, energy nexus and mainly focusing on water and how that relates to these other two major systems. And so that's kind of the backdrop for the work that I've done. And so I figure today I'll talk to you about the different GIS projects I've been on throughout my PhD, my postdoctoral work, and then now as a AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow. And I'll tell you what that acronym means a little bit later. The work that I ended up doing for the PhD was very transdisciplinary. So I ended up doing some phytoremediation, that is using plants to clean up soils and groundwater from different chemical constituents that are in produced water. I also modeled the flow of some of the organic components of produced water spill through soil and groundwater systems. And then I did an analysis of some of the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission's publicly available data to see if I could summarize characteristics found across spill sites. And so one thing that I did end up finding out is that there is a statistically significant correlation between the depth of groundwater below the soil surface and its risk of groundwater contamination in the event of a produced water spill. And I was able to find from publicly available data and to create this logistic regression line that describes the relationship. And so during my PhD, that's sort of where I left that work. But if you look at the map on the right, that is the southwestern portion of Weld County. That's where the majority of spills occur. And they're occurring mainly in the South Platte alluvial aquifer, which is very shallow. And so you can imagine if you have a really high risk of groundwater contamination, if there's shallow groundwater at a spill site, you would be able to model that across the landscape. We could apply this regression line to the known depths of groundwaters across Weld County or across Colorado potentially. And so that's sort of where this work left off. So the reason I kind of say that is because these are just some of the offshoots of my PhD research that I didn't really get to do. So my PhD research did not end up being highly geospatial, but there was definitely opportunities for it at the time. And I would just say, I guess I didn't really pursue it because I sort of felt like I had the limited technical skills at that time. So I'll kind of summarize what I learned from that PhD experience, not so much related to GIS, but kind of careers in general. So as I said, I came in with my own research funding, and while that gives you a lot of flexibility, it also can make it so that, in my circumstance, I didn't have a whole lot of guidance as to where I should take my research, what challenges I should really take on versus what I should leave behind, those sorts of things, because I had my own funding and I was kind of able to design things on my own. So what I found is that I really had to be a self-starter. I had to make it happen on my own. Let's see. And I also had to seek out resources on my own. So I ended up having to look for funds to pay for research costs and things like that. And those were all things that I sort of had to pursue on my own. So the reason I say that is because if you do decide to go down the route of getting maybe a master's or a PhD, there's sort of two different classes of mentoring. You can have a mentor or an advisor who is really hands-on with you and who can really help guide you, but you maybe would have less flexibility to study the things that you want. At the same time, maybe you would get some better, more in-depth training because that person's an expert. So those are just some things to think about if you decide to go down that route. You really want to try to look at what the mentoring style is of your mentor. Let's see. The other thing I would suggest is that the friends you make in school are a hugely valuable resource. I don't think I would have made it through the PhD without my friends. I really leaned on them for everything, but also for a lot of research help of figuring out how to do analyses and I had a friend who helped me a lot with all of the different little GIS things that I was doing. Um, I had big study groups of friends so that we could do really well in our coursework. And so I would say, and then this was kind of standard throughout my whole college years, that my friends were really the reason that I did well in school. So I would say try to utilize your friends as much as you can. And then I'll say that being interdisciplinary is rewarding but difficult. And so interdisciplinary, that just means two or more disciplines are, within a field of study. Transdisciplinary means that it's including stakeholders. Oftentimes we talk about community stakeholders. And so a really valuable lesson that I took away here that I didn't even know was a lesson at the time is that the work I did was very siloed. Even though I studied things that were interdisciplinary, I didn't include the community and I didn't include regulators or oil and gas operators. And that really limited the effects of my research because people can go on Web of Science and find the articles that I published, but who's going to be making the significant changes that I had suggested? Well, I'm not really sure that oil and gas operators are going to Web of Science and looking for publications to increase their sustainability. So it is really important to try to include stakeholders, industry, government, those sorts of things, but it can make things take a lot longer. And I didn't go down that route for my PhD. Let's see. And then the last thing I'll mention here is that I had a really hard time finding that first job after my PhD. I didn't have a good sense of what I wanted to do after this work. As I said, I sort of had a bunch of ideas of what to study, and a few different things panned out. And I couldn't really identify what qualifications that I would have for any particular job. It was sort of ambiguous to me. So I applied for lots of jobs and it was very discouraging. So I would just say if you get to a position like that, don't give up. I would say sometimes breaking into the field can be a really difficult thing to do, but you just need that one in. And the one in, the way you'll get that is through the people that you know. So every job I've ever gotten has been because of knowing someone associated with it somehow. So network, even though I know most people, that's not their ideal way to spend their time is networking. But I would just say, the easiest way to network is to just follow the things that you're interested in and talk to people who are doing those things. And it doesn't need to be a big deal. People are always interested in talking to students. So I would say just try to broaden your networks and follow up on the things that you're interested in. So that leads me to the position I had for my postdoctoral work. And that is called the Secondary Cities Initiative. So the way that I came to this position is that my mentor that I had during my PhD, Melinda Latourie, she, as I said, she was pretty hands-off during my PhD research. And then afterwards, she had a project doing some river restoration and they needed some outreach coordinator. And so and it was just a small project, and she asked me if I wanted to be a part of it. And I was like, sure, I'm desperate. I'll take any job right now, please. And so I did that with her for a few months, and then it ended, and that was sort of it. And I was still on the job hunt. Well, because Melinda was happy with the work that I had done with her for the river restoration project, she actually called me back and asked me if I wanted to be a part of the Secondary Cities Initiative, which I'll tell you what that's about in a minute, as a postdoctoral project. I had never really thought I would do a postdoc, but I didn't have a whole lot of opportunities coming my way. And I kind of felt like I had gone this far, why not just continue going? This project was on a complete different field of study for me, and it was very geospatially focused. And I did not have a whole lot of those skills coming in. I had taken one GIS class with my advisor during my PhD, and I got a B plus. So, not terrible, but not great. And I took one remote sensing class. So I didn't feel like I had a whole lot of skills going in, but what I came to find out was that was okay. And so the Secondary Cities Initiative is a collaboration between Colorado State University and the US Department of State and the Humanitarian Information Unit. And so this was my first time working with the federal government. So that has its challenges in and of itself. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And so this project, the aim was to help rapidly expanding resource limited cities in low and middle income countries map their resources, services, and infrastructure to help prepare for resiliency, human security, and emergency preparedness. So we have 16 participating cities. And what I ended up finding was that there were so many overlapping challenges, things from food security, ecosystem degradation, insufficient waste collection and management. There were hazardous conditions, people living in the flood zone or on steep slopes that are at risk of landslides. There was also unclear land ownership and affordable housing, and inefficient or insufficient and unreliable water and electricity infrastructure. And these things all kind of affect one another, so a lot of these cities, for example, they use firewood for their main source of energy for heating. So they'll cut down the forest, that ends up degrading the water quality and leads to erosion that affects agriculture. So there's a lot of these intertwined issues. Came in, they really, there was not a whole lot of guidance on what data was important to collect. And not just locations of data, but what are the attributes that are most important that describe this particular infrastructure, for example. So yeah, I'll give an example. Like here, you can see in the upper right, the education layer. So there's a lot of things you can learn about educational infrastructure. You can ask questions about how many students are there, the balance of gender, the sanitary equipment, hand washing stations, if it's public or private, the building material. There's just a lot of different questions you could ask that relate to a lot of different topics. So I had this kind of fun experience where I went through all of the different complicated topics that were experienced by these secondary cities members, and kind of came up with a cumulative list of what are the most important layers for you to collect to understand these complex challenges, and what are the attributes associated with those things, and how should the data be formatted so that it's easily understandable and easily combinable with other data. And so here is just some of the data layers that we ended up having each secondary cities member collect. And then you can see in the middle there, that is that's in Accra, Ghana. I had a wonderful time getting to go on a technical exchange in Accra. Let's see, it was 2019, and it was my first time going to Africa. Before this, I had never really done any international work. And so this trip in particular really changed my entire outlook on my career and the things that I wanted to do, because I recognized that there were so many challenges being experienced there, and that Africa really needs to be empowered to be able to work on these challenges, and that we should give it any help that is needed, but not provide the guiding hand necessarily, because there's been a little bit too much of that done already by the West in the global South. And so it really gave me kind of a new career trajectory going on this trip. And then the last thing I'll show you here is that on the right lower hand side is all of the data layers that were collected from our secondary cities. We stored them on what's called the Secondary Cities GeoNode. It's an open source geospatial platform. And so we housed all of the data there, and I helped manage that geo database as well as their website. So I figured I would list out the duties, the kind of operational duties that I did for the Secondary Cities Initiative. So I managed that geo database, the 2C GeoNode, and that was a brand new experience for me. I really had not, I didn't know any of the terms, I didn't know about the technology, nothing like that. And so I asked a lot of questions and I watched a lot of YouTube videos. I designated the data scheme. So I showed you all of the different common data layers and the different attributes that we had each secondary cities collect. One of the main things I did was a lot of data QA QC. So a major challenge in this work is that it's a major network, and we were partnering with universities, cities, and we were working with students in particular who went out and collected this geospatial data. And so as you can imagine, this is across the world, across languages, across disciplines. And because of that, and then, maybe people who have not had a huge amount of background in data formatting. So there was a lot of cleaning up of data to make sure that it made sense. I managed the 2C website. So it's just www.secondarycities.org, I believe. So you can go check that out. I developed GIS trainings, and I presented those at different technical exchanges and webinars. I wrote grants. So at the end of this project, we ended up losing funding. We had been funded from the DoD, and then that funding, I believe, ended up going to the border wall. And so that was a big blow to us. It was awfully emotional when you put so much of yourself into a project, have funding cut, but those things are not uncommon. So so I looked for grants to try to keep it going. And there is some version of it going now, but it has mainly what we like to call graduated. Let's see, I hosted events. So I hosted a big symposium at Harvard University. That was really fun and a brand new experience for me. I coordinated all of our international partners and stakeholders to collect all of the different types of data that we wanted. I conducted geospatial data integration and analyses to better understand vulnerabilities in communities. And I mainly focused on water scarcity in particular. Okay, so what did I end up learning from that work? So I learned that you can learn almost anything about GIS and about geodatabases and data structures on YouTube and the internet. I had to be a self-starter to figure those things out and to push along the projects. And I ended up figuring out that I could find anything on YouTube. So that's all of the methodologies I came up for my publications. Those were from learning about tools on YouTube. Let's see, I learned that data formatting, metadata, data keys, while they're pretty annoying, personally, I don't like to have to do them when I'm creating data, but it is so important to ensure that your data is meaningful and that it has some sort of legacy, that it continues on once the person who developed it is no longer around. And that's what I found so much in these lower and middle income countries, is that maybe whoever creates the data, they understand what it means, but once there's a lot of turnover in, for example, local governments in developing countries, and then that person may not be there, and then that data is meaningless. So make your data count as much as it possibly can by having really strict formatting guidelines. Make sure you're filling out your metadata and things like that. Okay, the one major thing I learned from this is that it is so important to try new things because you might end up enjoying them even if they're a challenge. So when I was approached about taking on this project, I really didn't think I was going to be able to do it. I thought I have pretty much no geospatial skills. I've done a little bit of outreach, but and then they were talking about human geography. I didn't know anything about that. I didn't understand the lingo. And it was a wonderful challenge for me. I learned so much and I found a real niche for myself that I would have never had a chance to do had I not had this opportunity. So I love the international work I learned. I loved working with students, but not being a teacher. I just love working with students to create data or work on sustainability projects. So I really learned a lot from this. I learned that helping people integrate data is vital for systems thinking and sustainability. So what this program lacked, and it was through no fault of anyone on our side, I would say, but it was by the design of the Department of State. We really didn't, even though we provided data, the data was created, we housed it, we didn't integrate it. I did some data integration with those publications you saw, but not a whole stinking lot, And so I left the project thinking, God, we need a better way for people to easily integrate their data. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. And then, GIS tech can become antiquated fairly easily. So for example, that open source 2C GeoNode that was developed for us, once the money goes away and the developers go away, you're really in a tough spot because you cannot guarantee that it's going to work long term. So if you ever go down that route, you're going to want to think about a business sustainability plan for keeping things like that running. The other thing is that I learned there's tons of jobs in GIS. All of my interns that I ended up working with on this project got hired in good GIS jobs, mainly at like the city level. So, there's tons of distributed city GIS types of jobs. And I was applying for jobs like that too, and I had no luck. So I didn't know, is it just me? Do I suck? I don't know. But at that point, I think the issue is that I had a PhD, and a lot of times people think that means you want more money. Doesn't necessarily mean that, but, and it didn't in my case. But yeah, so I sort of had, as I said, kind of siloed myself into, maybe a career as a professor at this point. I didn't quite know what I was going to be doing. And then the last thing I'll say here is that network is almost everything. So as I said, I got this secondary cities position because I knew my advisor from some previous work. And that's the exact same way that I got my next job. So I'll tell you a little bit about that right now. Okay, so my current position is a AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow. The way that I even found out about this fellowship is because my advisor that I was working with on the Secondary Cities project, she was supposed to give a talk at an NSF, a National Science Foundation sponsored sustainability workshop event. And she wasn't able to attend, so she asked me to go in her place, and I did. I gave a presentation, and there I met someone who worked at the National Science Foundation and who had been they call it a AAAS fellow. And she was telling me how, all the things I'm saying I'm interested in doing, that, wow, you would fit really well with this fellowship. So the fellowship, applying for it was crazy. I've never been through quite an experience like that. But it went okay. I just took it one step at a time. There were a whole lot of steps. It was a year-long process of applying, but I made it. And so I am one of, I think, something like 200 fellows this year. So what this fellowship does is it pairs you with a host agency, either in the judicial, the legislative, or the federal branch of government. The federal branch of government has the majority of these fellowship positions, and that's where I'm placed. I'm placed in the National Science Foundation, and it's a really nice place to be. I'll tell you about that in a minute. And so when I was creating these slides, I was kind of laughing because I went to AAAS fellowship page and saw that I'm smack dab in the center there. So that's my face. So the beginning of the fellowship, for about the first 3 weeks, they provide really intensive training on how government works. And we talked a lot about science policy. We talked a lot about checks and balances on the government, the organizational structure of these different entities. And we talked a lot about funding, those sorts of things. And so I am placed in the National Science Foundation. And one reason that I try to go there is because the NSF is pretty stable from bipartisan activity, or it is bipartisan, I would say. And it's also fairly unaffected from any sort of tensions that are going on. Partisan tensions. And so that was important to me because at the time it just felt like kind of an unstable time to try to get in the federal government. But I was really interested in understanding how research gets funded. I was hardly successful at doing that during my work, so I kind of wanted a better understanding of that. And then, so the NSF, it's an independent agency. The president appoints 2 positions to NSF, but that's it. So we have a lot of anonymity. And currently there's only one presidential appointed person. The interesting thing about it is they overlap presidencies. So for example, the current director his name is Ponch, and he probably started halfway into Trump's presidency, and then will go halfway through Biden's presidency. So we support fundamental research, education, and research infrastructure. We use the granting mechanism. So we put out calls for proposals, and then people write a proposal and submit that. We have extremely low overhead. This was so impressive to me. So whatever money comes into the NSF, only 7% of it is kept internally to pay salaries, things like that. 93% of it leaves the agency through the form of grants. It's a discipline-based structure. It's kind of a similar structure to academia. It's probably the most kind of like academia within the federal government. It's cross-disciplinary, and there's a mix of permanent staff and rotators. And I'm a fellow, so I'm neither of those. I'm not technically employed by NSF, and I need to remember to say that nothing that I say right now is a representation of NSF. I am speaking purely as a AAAS fellow. So I do a whole lot of things at the NSF, and my fellowship is actually, I'm a Belmont Fellow. So the Belmont Forum is a consortium of international funding agencies that fund global climate change research. And in order to be qualified for Belmont Forum funding, you have to meet 3 criteria. The first is that your research needs to be co-produced. That means that every step of the way you're working with stakeholders in the community. The other thing is that your research needs to have at least 3 different countries on the research proposal. So for example, maybe you have a researcher in the US and a researcher in Ghana and a researcher in France, and they would all come together to submit a proposal. And then the third item is that it has to be transdisciplinary, meaning that that includes a variety of different stakeholders, but most importantly, or not most importantly, but one thing that has to be met is that social scientists are included, because the general understanding is the reason there has not been any sort of transformative change in sustainability is because we haven't done a good job of bringing the people in, and we haven't done a good job of bringing in the people who understand the people. So that's the 3 criteria that you need for the Belmont Forum. And I manage a few different, what they're called collaborative research actions. They're just a few, or they're different topics that we fund. So for example, right now I am the there's a lot of acronyms that we use in this world too. So it's called the TPO, so the Thematic Program Office. That's pretty much me. So I run the Pathways to Sustainability call, the Food, Water, Energy Nexus call, the some calls that are upcoming, so I'm not really allowed to discuss those, and a few other things. So that's just one little part of what I do right now. I work with a whole bunch of other organizations associated with NSF and associated with this organization called the USGCRP. That's the US Global Climate Change Research Program. And their major product is the National Climate Assessment. You might have heard about that. But part of their, and I think they were established in the 90s, part of their mandate is that they need to fund international global climate change research. Well, they don't really have the capacity to do that, so they outsource to some amazing organizations like Future Earth, also the IAI, that's the Inter-American Institute for Global Change Research. They're based in the Global South. And so, and then another thing I do is I help to coordinate linkages between different types of sustainability and global climate change fellowships. So the IAI, they have a fellowship, a sustainability fellowship. Future Earth has global sustainability scholars, and then there's another one called Future Leaders. And so I'm helping to find linkages between all of those programs. I am the executive director of the prepdata.org partnership. It's the PrEP partnership. And what this is, it's a consortium of partners, both public and private. And so let's look at those now. Let's see, who are our partners? Okay, so our core partners, as I said, Future Earth and WRI, you might know of them, the World Resource Institute. They're amazing partners. And then we have lots of contributing partners like Amazon Web Services, Climatize, Carto. Let's see, who else? We have Esri in here. They're mainly keeping an eye on us to make sure we're not stepping on their toes. Let's see who else. START, that's another program I work with as a AAAS fellow. The DOI, Department of the Interior, NOAA, NASA, and Visuality. Those are our web developers, or our platform developers. Okay, so let me tell you what PrEP data is. So PrEP data is a geospatial platform to disseminate downscaled climate change indicators. Okay, so what that means is that we have all of these global climate change models, and they have a whole lot of variables that they set with them. You know, they say they have different emission scenarios. So like, what if we really get our act together and we stop emitting? Or what if we stop emitting a certain proportion? Or what if it's business as usual? But the outputs from these climate models are not very useful for kind of the lay person. You know, we want to know things more like, how many heat days are there in a year? And how many extreme weather events are you projected to have under different climate scenarios? Those sorts of things. So what PrEP data does is we have curated best-in-class data that visualize information across a range of climate variables and a few particular ranges of modeling. So like, you know, we'll go up to 2070, for example, and you could see how things would change in your location over, you know, those 50 years. And you could see how many extreme weather events, or you can see if your area is projected to be arid, or if there's going to be more water, or how your agriculture will be affected. Okay, so I thought I would just go through and show you what that looks like. So let's look at some of the different things in here. So we have these GADM administrative boundaries, sub-administrative boundaries. So that's useful to go in and look at different regions. We have some NOAA data on flooding on the coast in the United States. One thing you'll notice is this is very globally north centered. There's pretty much across platforms and geospatial work, there has not a lot of data on the global south. So that's one thing that I'm particularly interested in studying. So here we have the US projected change in the number of days over 90 degrees under a high emission scenario. Let's see, here we have the annual precipitation. So you could see things like that. So these are all, right now I'm in all data sets, but we have these core data sets, and you can see they cover a range of topics like temperature, precipitation, extreme events, coastal risk, water risk. Let's see, we can also look at people. They have the CISN population grid. So you can see how population distribution looks across the world. We actually have that for the global south as well. So let's see, I was going to tell you now why this is interesting, why this is different. Okay, the reason is because it's super easy to use. So I'm going to show you now. Okay, first off, if you were using Esri, you would have to pay. And you know, sometimes Esri products, they don't seem that expensive to us in the United States because maybe you have a license through a university. That makes it really cheap for you. But my experience with the Secondary Cities Initiative was that an Esri license for a university or for a group, the cost of it is different throughout the world. And it's super, super expensive in the global south. And so, especially compared to like, excuse me, GDPE. And so, so that's really an exclusionary that excludes a lot of people. On top of it, you need quite a lot of expertise to be able to use the different types of software platforms that are available for you to integrate data. Okay, so that's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is that, you know, say you have a good platform, it disseminates for, say you're NASA and you have this climate change data information and you have a platform that is visualizing that data. Most of the times those platforms, you cannot integrate them with local data. If you can't integrate it with data, other data, how useful is it? I just don't think it's useful very much at all. So this platform hits the sweet spot because it's easy to use, it's free, and you can upload your own local data and integrate it with all of these other pieces of information. And I'm going to show you that now. So when I first came on Prep Data, I decided that I needed to do a full assessment of the platform and the data that's on there. And I ended up using that explore function to look at all the data that's on there. And I uploaded some local data that I had from the Secondary Cities Initiative for Pemba, Mozambique. And so this is a dashboard that I made, super simple. I made it very quickly, but you can easily embed other websites. So this is a Secondary Cities website. I just embedded it. I put in, you can easily put in these screenshots. It's not a screenshot, it's a link to the data that, any of the data that's on that explore function. So here you could see the population distribution in Pemba. And then here's some, and then it can make graphics. So you could see here how the population has changed over time. Here's a pretty interesting one. This is students, and that's overlaid with landslide potential. So you can see there's quite a lot of schools that are within areas that have a moderate risk for landslide potential. So that's just a few of the layers that are on there. I didn't really show you anything like population or precipitation or any of the really cool climate variables, because right now we're redoing this downscaled methodology just to make sure we have the best available data on the site. And so, so I didn't show you that here right now, but that should be back up in like a week. Here's my last thoughts. So my lessons learned. So I would say the lessons that I've learned just having been at this new position for even, I think, less than 2 months, is that there is the utmost need to focus our attention on global climate change, but the solutions are going to exist at the local level. And so that's kind of a conundrum, right? Because I'm studying this global climate change, but how do I reach the people? Because they're the ones who make the changes, or the local government. Those are the people who make local policies. So that's something I'm still working out. Studying climate change is really scary, but it's motivating. So, it is hard to take on some of these huge topics. They can feel insurmountable. But I would say, kind of through my other work, I realized that I can make a real contribution. And so I try to just take it at face value, not think too hard about things sometimes. There are incredibly dedicated people within the federal government. You might be surprised, but there's definitely people who are not also. But I would say that my hope rests with sort of these legacy, or with, I can't remember what they really call them, but the people who get these federal positions and they're there across administrations, Republican, Democrat, they're working across boundaries, and those people, I think we just need to thank them. Everything is geospatial, whether it's pointed out or not. So everything I do, even though now I'm managing prep data, but that's only a small part of what I do. I do all that other work I told you, like with Belmont Forum. And even though we don't always say it, everything is geospatial, and finding a way to bring it back home and to point these things out, I think is important. And let's see, geospatial positions, they exist at every scale. So I always sort of thought that, if I wanted a GIS position, it would be with the city or something like that. But no, there's lots. And there's lots in the federal government as well. At USAID in particular, they have a whole geospatial center with a lot of amazing people working there. So, that's something that you may want to look at in the future. This career path I've taken is probably not the path to wealth. Let's face it, I am making more money than I ever have before, and that is great. And especially now, I'm incredibly thankful. And if anything, I feel guilty, particularly right now. But my husband always reminds me that I was in school for a very long time. So, but even then, the position I have now, I would say, the salary I make is tailored to the amount of stress in work that you have to do. So there's a trade-off there. Okay, kind of some overall advice is to try to learn a little bit about everything. So what I'm finding now is, because I was never really an expert in any particular thing. Even though I got my PhD, I never felt like an expert in one thing over another. But I'm finding that actually has helped me, because I know a lot about a lot of different things. I would recommend that if you can, to volunteer to try out new things. So for example, I volunteered a few years ago to be on the energy board for the city of Fort Collins, and I'm the chair of the board now. And that has been really, at the time I didn't recognize how much that was going to help me in the future, but I would say it's definitely helped with my job applications, and it's helped with like just knowing that I like to work in policy. Okay, when things aren't going your way, it doesn't mean that that things won't turn around, but you need to make sure that you keep showing up so that when the opportunity arises, you're there. And the reason I say that is because I had that really discouraging full year of not being able to find a job after my PhD, and it was really scary. And I was ready to just take any job, but I'll say lean into your friends and your network, keep networking, and you will find that position of your dreams. So with that, I think I went on way too long. So sorry about that, but I hope that everything I've said is helpful in some way or another. And Jamie can give y'all my email address if you want to get in touch with me to talk about any of these things further, or if you have any questions, I'd be more than willing to help. And so good luck with your semester, take care, and I hope to see y'all soon. Bye.